Imagine placing a marble on your kitchen table and watching it roll slowly but steadily toward the edge, even though the floor looks perfectly level. Now imagine that marble is actually a billion-dollar skyscraper, and the table is the soft, muddy soil of San Francisco. In early 2024, the residents of one of the most expensive luxury towers in the world woke up to a terrifying reality. After years of being told that their sinking, leaning building had been fixed by a massive $500 million engineering project, the building started moving again. The tower isn't just sinking into the ground, it's tilting at an angle that is now visible to the naked eye if you stand at the right street corner. Experts and engineers, after throwing every trick in the book at this $5 billion disaster, are starting to whisper the one thing no one wants to hear. They are out of options. Today, we are going inside the most expensive sinking ship on dry land to understand the catastrophic engineering failure that turned a miracle of modern architecture into a vertical nightmare that simply refuses to stand up straight. The story of the Millennium Tower in San Francisco was doomed from the moment the first shovel hit the dirt, but the engineers at the time were too confident to see it. San Francisco is a city built on a foundation of what if. What if we build houses on these impossibly steep hills? What if we build a city right on top of a major tectonic fault line? But for the Millennium Tower, the what if was even more dangerous. What if we build a 60-story, heavy concrete skyscraper on a foundation that doesn't actually reach the bedrock? Most skyscrapers in San Francisco are anchored deeply into the solid rock beneath the city, but the Millennium Tower's engineers decided to use a floating foundation. They drove concrete piles about 80 feet into the ground into a layer of dense sand and clay. The problem? Bedrock was another 200 feet further down. They essentially built a 500 million pound giant and sat it on a bed of wet sponges. By 2016, the building had already sunk 16 inches and leaned 2 inches to the northwest. That doesn't sound like much until you realize that in the world of skyscrapers, an inch is a mile. When a building leans, the weight distribution shifts. The elevators start to rub against their tracks. The plumbing pipes begin to strain at the joints, and the glass facade starts to experience stress points that shouldn't exist. The owners of these multi-million-dollar condos started noticing cracks in the basement and popping sounds in the walls. The city became a scene of finger-pointing between the developers, the city planners, and the transit authority next door who were building a massive terminal and supposedly dewatering the soil under the tower. But while the lawyers argued, the tower kept sinking. In 2020, they launched what was supposed to be the ultimate fix. It was a bold, expensive plan called the Perimeter Pile Upgrade. The idea was to drive 52 massive new piles all the way down to the bedrock, nearly 300 feet deep, and then jack the building onto these new supports. It was effectively like putting a prosthetic leg under the leaning side of the tower to prop it back up. It cost over $100 million and took years of construction. The residents lived through a constant barrage of hammering and drilling, hoping that this was the end of their nightmare. For a while, it seemed to work. The leaning slowed down, the building stabilized, the engineers took a victory lap. Then came 2024. As the final stages of the fix were being completed, the sensors installed throughout the building started to go off again. To the shock of the engineering world, the building began to tilt in a new direction. It turns out that by anchoring one side of the building to the bedrock while the other side was still floating on the clay, the engineers created a pivot point. Instead of stabilizing the building, the new piles acted like a hinge. The part of the building that wasn't anchored started to sink faster, causing the tower to twist and lean in a way that the computer models hadn't predicted. It was like trying to level a four-legged chair by only putting a block under one leg. All you do is make it wobble in a different direction. Why is this happening? It's because the soil under San Francisco is far more complex than a simple computer simulation can capture. The Old Bay clay layer is a prehistoric deposit that behaves like a slow-moving liquid when subjected to extreme pressure. By driving massive steel piles through it, the engineers actually disturbed the clay even more, causing it to settle and compress. Every time they tried to fix the tilt, they added more weight and more vibration to the ground, which further destabilized the very foundation they were trying to save. It is a classic engineering feedback loop where the solution is feeding the problem. The situation in 2024 has become desperate because the easy fixes are all gone. You can't just keep adding more piles. At some point, the foundation becomes a forest of steel that leaves no room for the soil to hold its own weight. There are suggestions of chemical grouting, where they pump high-pressure resins into the soil to turn the mud into rock. But that is incredibly risky. If the resin doesn't spread evenly, you could create hard spots that cause the building to snap or crack under its own weight. The engineers are looking at a three-dimensional puzzle, where every move they make has 100 unintended consequences. Inside the building, the atmosphere has shifted from frustration to a kind of quiet panic. These are homes that people paid $5, $10, even $15 million for. Now they are living in a structure that is a global laughingstock. On the upper floors, some residents report that if they leave a round object on the floor, it will slowly migrate toward the corner of the room. The luxury amenities, the indoor pool, the wine cellar, the private gym are still there, but they are overshadowed by the constant presence of monitoring equipment and the sight of tilt meters taped to the walls. It is a gilded cage that is slowly sinking into the mud. The financial engineering behind the tower is just as broken as the structural engineering. The building was originally valued at over $1 billion. Today, it's hard to even put a price on it. Some units have sold for a fraction of their original cost. But many banks are refusing to even issue mortgages for the building. It is unfinanceable. You have a situation where the wealthiest people in San Francisco are essentially stuck in a stranded asset. They can't sell, they can't fix it, and they can't walk away from the millions of dollars they've invested. And then there is the elephant in the room. San Francisco is one of the most seismically active cities in the world. The Millennium Tower is sitting just miles away from the San Andreas and Hayward faults. Every engineer knows that liquefaction is the greatest threat during an earthquake. This is when solid ground behaves like a liquid due to the shaking. If the building is already leaning and its foundation is already stressed in a calm year, what happens when a major earthquake hits? The fear isn't that the building will tip over instantly, but that the foundation will fail in a way that makes the building permanently uninhabitable. The tilt that is a nuisance today could become a catastrophic alignment failure in a matter of seconds. The developers continue to claim the building is perfectly safe to live in, and structurally, they may be right for now. The steel and concrete are strong enough to handle the lean without snapping, but safe and livable are two different things. A building that destroys its own elevator system because the shafts are no longer vertical is not a functional building. A building where the sewer lines have to be constantly adjusted because the fall of the pipes is going the wrong way is not a luxury residence. It is a high-tech survival pod. We have to look at how this fits into the broader theme of failing megaprojects. It's the arrogance of believing that technology can always overcome the fundamental laws of nature. The engineers who designed the Millennium Tower were some of the best in the world. They used the best software, they had the best materials, but they ignored the basic principle of reaching the bottom. They tried to save money by not going to the bedrock, and that one decision, made 20 years ago, is now costing hundreds of millions of dollars to try and reverse. It is a $5 billion lesson in the importance of foundations, both literal and metaphorical. There is also the sunk cost fallacy at play. The city and the developers have already spent so much money trying to fix the tilt that they feel they cannot stop. To stop would be to admit that the building is a loss, so they keep proposing new upgrades and stabilization plans. But in 2024, the public perception has reached a breaking point. People are looking at the tower and seeing a vertical version of the Titanic. The more they try to patch the hull, the faster the water seems to come in. Let's talk about the tilt mechanics for a second, because it's fascinating and terrifying. When a building leans, it creates what's called a P-delta effect. The weight of the building is no longer pushing straight down through the columns. Instead, it's creating a sideways force. The more it leans, the more that sideways force increases. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. The lean creates pressure. The pressure compresses the soil, which causes more lean. To stop this, you have to apply an equal and opposite force, which is what those new piles were supposed to do. But in a building this heavy, the forces involved are so massive that they are almost beyond human control. The engineers in 2024 are now discussing internal weight redistribution. This would involve moving massive amounts of heavy equipment from one side of the building to the other, or even adding massive lead weights to the high side of the building to try and counterbalance the lean. Think about the irony of that. You are adding thousands of tons of extra weight to a building that is already sinking because it's too heavy for the soil. It's like trying to save a sinking boat by adding more gold to the other side to keep it level. It might work for a minute, but eventually you're just going to sink faster. The city of San Francisco is in a tough spot. They can't just condemn the building. Where do you put hundreds of residents? How do you handle the lawsuits that would follow? The local economy would take a massive hit, and the reputation of the city's skyscraper district would be ruined. So, the city has no choice but to keep approving these experimental fixes, hoping that one of them will finally stick. It is a codependency between the city and a failing tower. They are tied together in a slow-motion descent. What does this mean for the future of skyscrapers? It means the floating foundation for heavy concrete towers is likely a thing of the past in seismically active or soft soil areas. We are seeing a return to conservative engineering, where going to the bedrock is no longer optional. It's the law. The Millennium Tower has become a ghost in the machine for every architect in the world. It's the example they use to justify the extra $50 million for deeper piles. It's the cautionary tale told to every engineering student. But for the people inside, the cautionary tale is their daily life. They are living through an engineering experiment that has no guaranteed outcome. They are the test subjects for high-rise stabilization technology. If the 2024 tilt continues to accelerate, the building may eventually reach a point of no return. This is the point where the cost of the fix exceeds the total value of the building. When that happens, the options don't just run out for the engineers, they run out for the owners and the city as well. I want you to imagine the sheer scale of the equipment involved in these fixes. We are talking about drills the size of houses and steel beams that are hundreds of feet long. All of this is happening in the middle of a busy city, surrounded by millions of dollars of other real estate. The logistics alone are archival quality. Every pound of dirt removed has to be carefully measured. Every inch of movement is tracked by satellites and laser sensors. It is the most monitored building on the planet. And yet, it still won't do what it's told. As we look at the skyline of San Francisco, the Millennium Tower stands as a monument to a specific kind of hubris. It was built during a time of limitless growth and tech-fueled optimism. It was designed to be a symbol of the new San Francisco. Now it is a symbol of the hidden costs of that growth. It is a reminder that you can't build a future on a foundation of sand. No matter how much neon you add or how fancy the lobby is, the earth beneath you has the final word. The engineers are out of options not because they aren't smart, but because they are fighting a battle that might not be winnable. You can't win against gravity and geology. You can only cooperate with them. Millennium Tower tried to defy them, and now it's paying the price. As the tilt continues to be measured in millimeters every week, the world watches to see if the building will eventually find its own equilibrium, or if it will become a permanent monument to a failed mega project. What happens next? Most likely, another round of emergency stabilization and another $100 million bill. The litigation will continue for decades. The residents will continue to live in a building that is technically moving beneath their feet, and the rest of the world will continue to look at San Francisco and wonder how a billion-dollar tower could be so fundamentally misunderstood by the people who built it. This is the reality of modern engineering. We are building bigger, taller, and heavier than ever before. Most of the time, we get it right, but when we get it wrong on this scale, there is no easy way out. There is no Control-Z for a skyscraper. You have to live with the mistakes of the past, even as they lean further and further into the future. The Millennium Tower is a sinking ship in a city of hills, and the world is still waiting to see if anyone can actually bring it back to level. Until then, it remains the most expensive work in progress in history. A tower of glass and steel that was meant to touch the stars but is instead too focused on the mud. As we wrap up our look inside this $5 billion disaster, keep in mind that the story of the Millennium Tower isn't over. 2024 is just the latest chapter in a saga that will likely define the city's architecture for a century. It's a story about the limits of human knowledge and the power of the natural world. It's a story about why some things, no matter how much they cost, simply can't be saved from themselves. If you're ever in San Francisco, take a look at the tower from the street. You might not see the tilt at first, but keep looking. The more you stare, the more you realize that something is fundamentally wrong, and then you'll understand why the engineers are so worried. Because once a giant starts to fall, even the strongest cables in the world might not be enough to hold it back. The situation is a testament to the fact that engineering is as much an art as it is a science. It requires a humility that isn't always present in the high-stakes world of real estate development. The Millennium Tower is what happens when that humility is forgotten. It is a vertical lesson in physics, economics, and human nature. And in 2024, that lesson is getting louder and more expensive every single day. The world's most famous Leaning Tower used to be in Italy, but today it's in the heart of the American tech capital, and unlike the one in Pisa, this one wasn't supposed to be a tourist attraction. It was supposed to be a home. And that is the biggest tragedy of all. In the race to the top, we forgot to make sure we were standing on solid ground. Now we're all just waiting to see where the ground takes us next.